Imagine Switzerland, a country that has no seafood culture, has no salmon in its rivers, known for banks and chocolates. Now imagine the Swiss Alps. Not many great roads, a lot of cows. Now imagine this 300-year-old farmhouse, uninhabited and empty for over 70 years. And that is where the stage actor Hans-Gert Kübel decided to produce the world's most expensive salmon in 1978. My name is Peter Rebeiz. I'm the chairman of Caviar House in Prunier, manufacturer of fine caviar and smoked salmon, where 60% of everything we produce is sold through our own retail stores and seafood bars around the world. I'm here today to tell the story of our smoked salmon. I bought Balik in 1988, and when I told my parents about the Alps, the lack of communication, the old farmhouse, lots of cows, Switzerland, smoked salmon, and that I had decided to purchase this company, my father looked at my mother. That couldn't be his son. And my mother, with a greater concern in her eyes, told me that she knew of a place where I might get help. But the story of this unique product, in fact, did not really start in 1978 when Kübel made it, but as far as we know, 100 years earlier, and that was in the Russian imperial court. The Tsars of Russia were the wealthiest monarchs in the world. Should one compare by today's standard with the Queen of England, the Russian Tsars were worth 400 times more. The Tsars' palaces were continuously the setting for the most lavish dinners, with absolute no expense spared. The Russian court was considered at that time one of the most sophisticated places of elegance, with its musical performances, its galleries of fine art, its unique creators of jewelry, and of course, a very innovative sense of gastronomy in every shape and form. One of the unique delicacies of the Russian court was, of course, Russian caviar and sturgeon meat. The sturgeon, especially the beluga sturgeon, could grow up to 6 meters long and provide 200 kilos of caviar, which at today's price would be equivalent to 6 Rolls Royces, and nearly 1,000 kilos of meat. And the Russian fishermen had found that all depend where you took the meat from, the tastes were different. And the back of the sturgeon was considered the most tasty part of all. At the imperial court, only the best part of that smoked sturgeon was served to the Tsar and his guests. And this meal was known as Balik. After the 1917 revolution, it became a crime punishable by imprisonment to live a lifestyle or consume products in any way that would remind of the Tsar and his imperial court. The incredible lifestyle of the Tsar and the Russian nobility in general had been made on the back of poor Russian, and now the Bolsheviks had taken over, and nobody could be better than the neighbor. As such, many products, handicrafts, traditions were abolished by the new Bolshevik thinking. And the Balik preparation and way of life was completely out of fashion. Now, some 55 years after, at the creation of the USSR, this stage actor, Hans-Gert Kübel, he was performing in Berlin a play by Ibrahim Lissing called Nathan der Weise. And there, at an after party, he met this gentleman called Israel Kaplan, who was boasting about the great days of the great Tsars and how his family had been the court smokers. Kübel, he was an unconditional lover of great food and history and wanted to hear much more. He had recently just purchased this old farmhouse in Switzerland where he started to sell eggs, Angus beef, and believe it or not, hand-picked hay, and had been considering to smoke trout from a nearby river. Knowing how much trout there is in that river, that would have been something like 10 kilos a year. Now, Kaplan told Kübel that he had built smoke ovens with his father as late as in 1915, and that he still remembered how to build one. So Kübel asked Kaplan if he would be interested in building one in his farmhouse. Kaplan agreed and spent several months in Switzerland. They built 2 ovens, just as he had done as a young man in St. Petersburg and in Riga. This was not something where there had been a research before to find out if the market liked it or not. There was absolutely no design, there was no business plan, and no real customer objectives. This had been an impulsive idea, passionate from the start, and Kübel somehow loved the idea of having his own smokery at home. I personally would have loved to be there when Kübel looked at Kaplan once the ovens were finished for the first time and asked, "So what do we smoke now?" And Kaplan looked at him strangely and said, "Don't you have sturgeons in Switzerland?" Now, before the performance in Berlin, Kübel had, and his encounter with Kaplan, Kübel had traveled the world. He went to Canada, to Scotland, to Greenland, to Denmark, and finally he came here to Norway, where it became clear to him that there was a lot more prestige in salmon than trout, and that the Norwegian salmon and farming and the whole approach was far superior. So he said, let's try salmon. In 1978, he orders his first shipment of Norwegian salmon to be delivered at the farm in Switzerland. I know from correspondence that I've seen that the Norwegians didn't really took him seriously when he said, please send it to my farm in Switzerland. The ovens, originally built for sturgeon, required a lot more fish than for one smoking cycle than Kübel and his friends could even have envisaged. So it wasn't long before he and his friends had smoked salmon coming out of their bloody ears. His intention had been somehow to retire from the stage if he would be able to sell some of his new smoked salmon. And even if the product was quite fantastic in comparison with other smoked salmon, he was not able to generate enough revenue, and as such he informed Mr. Kaplan of his intentions to close the ovens again permanently. Kaplan felt that the ovens he had built were so unique that it would be a pity to demolish them. Plus he had this idea that he believed somehow Kübel would love. He traveled back to Switzerland in 1983 and told him of the Russian Balik style. And he believed that that would be as valid for salmon as it had been in Russia, in Imperial Russia, for sturgeon. Furthermore, it would make a real difference to what the current market was offering. Kübel, whose general approach to life was a theater play, he was again fired up. Here was a great story. He was going to be the main actor. The farm would be his stage, and all of his friends and food lovers would become his audience. And understanding and knowing his audience, Hans-Gert Kübel knew only too well the vital importance of story, quality, and presentation. Smoking salmon at the farm had started in 1978, but it was not until 1984 that the first smoked fillet of salmon, using exclusively the back of the fish, as the Russian smokers had done almost 100 years ago, appeared on Kübel's stage. This marked the turning point of not only the Balik history, but also premium smoked salmon industry worldwide. Entirely handmade, using special wood aged for over 3 years at the farm, before smoking, only in contact with natural spring water off the farm, and of course, only the very best raw fish from Norway, and added together was an unconditional love for excellence, as that alone was a secret ingredient. Smoking salmon was never for the sake of preservation. The ovens were designed to barely caress the salmon with smoke just to give it a subtle taste. The reaction among the Swiss culinary elite was immediate. In 1984, the newly introduced Balik filet Tsar Nikolai, as it was called, was considered by the Swiss press and culinary aficionados to simply be the best smoked salmon in the world. 2 years later, this guy walks into one of our stores with 2 Balik filets under his arm and showed it to me. Now, I was born and raised in Copenhagen, and therefore had a little bit more traditional view on smoked salmon than most people in Switzerland. My grandmother had always told me that salmon was a luxury product. I couldn't really relate to this, because in Denmark you could buy all sorts of rubbish salmon for 50 Danish kroner a kilo. But with a ton of onions and pepper, you can turn almost everything around. But this was different. A packaging that was fit for luxury. A salmon that was flawless, without the slightest sign of imperfection. And the shape, long, stylish, and beautifully curved. And it was a new way to consume smoked salmon as well. For me then, it looked like a product that would deserve only the best champagne or white wine. And here comes the funny part. The sale price was 278 Swiss francs, over 2,000 Norwegian kroner. Already in 1988. That made it mysterious for me. Quite crazy, and therefore very interesting. And it was prohibited on the packet to use lemon and onions. I contacted the Balik company, and the following morning, Hans-Gert Kübel, he came to see me driving in a huge Harley Davidson with a sidecar for his dog and a refrigerated trailer for his salmon. "So you're the caviar man," he shouted to me. And then he continued, "I'm the salmon man. Let's do some business." Incidentally, I did a similar presentation like this one in America a couple of years ago and used this picture. And a woman came up to me and said she had never ever seen anything like this, and she didn't understand why Solzhenitsyn was producing salmon. So this is actually Hans-Gert Kübel. And that is when my journey into the world of Balik salmon started. This was not a rational world, where do's and don't do's of the business school was applied. This was much, much closer to the world of artistry, creation, and irrational food poetry. Nothing, and really nothing, really made sense. But then again, in hindsight, actually everything did. This was a world of absolute no compromise, continued search for perfection, wonderful presentation, and a guardian of an old tradition. And it had to be. The cost of manufacturing smoked salmon in the Swiss Alps was simply too exorbitant, and standard rules of commercialization of smoked salmon could never ever apply. A large Swiss hotel chain that was producing its own smoked salmon had made a very lucrative offer to Mr. Kübel to purchase his business. I was not in a position in those days to match their offer, and had to advise Kübel against my own interest to accept their offer. The following morning, he turned up at my parents' doorstep in Copenhagen, where I was spending the weekend. And my mother, of course, very surprised to meet the actor Hans-Gert Kübel in Copenhagen, offered the actor a coffee, which he accepted. For a while, he stared into that coffee cup and then looked at me, turned towards my mother, held up this Royal Copenhagen coffee cup, and said in a dramatic tone that belonged only to a Shakespearean play of Macbeth, "I have just spent 3 days underground in a conference room in one of the largest Swiss company, drinking coffee out of a bloody plastic cup. Such people should never own, produce, or sell Balik. You have the same coffee cup as I have at home." And then he looked at me and said, "If you want to buy Balik, it's yours, and we'll find a way around the price." And that became quite a challenge for us. Balik had been a great local success in Switzerland. But in order to justify its purchase, we had to make it a success internationally. At first, it seemed impossible. The international market believed the price of Balik to be absolutely too crazy, and I was accused many times of being just a naughty Swiss mountain marketing stunt. Other producers had started to copy Balik around the world without any clue as to what the quality and production chart of Balik really was. Now, most producers often go through a time where to become competitive, one have to do certain compromises. And I felt that time had come for us. But a bigger market share can also be one of the worst traps and shortcut to mediocrity. Too many fine products has become average and very mediocre due to high market demand of quantity, low price, and simplicity. I suppose the real art of increasing production capacity is to maintain the quality standards not as high as possible, but as high as when the product was initially created and when it met its original success. By 1995, we had identified over 200 copies of the filet Tsar Nikolai around the world. In spirit, however, unfortunately, never in quality. So we decided to stay our course of higher standards of quality, safeguarding our own tradition of a permanent search for perfection. Now today, we've sold over 1 million filet Tsar Nikolai around the world since its creation in 1984. A very interesting observation, because I've heard a couple of times you referring to the price today. Nobody complains about the price. Another interesting observation is that nobody in our stores asks if the salmon is farmed or wild. It's a brand. And sometimes the price is 10 times higher than the standard market price. Our farmhouse in the Swiss Alps has become one of the most visited smokeries worldwide. Now, apart from smoking salmon at the farm, we also organize various musical events, concerts, recordings of various top artists around the world. Kübel was a man of literature and poetry, and I myself, my roots lies more in music, composition, and orchestration. None of us came from business. As such, the house has remained, even 20 years after the death of Kübel, a meeting point of art and gastronomy. Now, Balik has existed for nearly 40 years today and has never produced and smoked other salmon than Norwegian salmon. It is not always easy to find the perfect raw fish quality that we require for Balik. And it has been, I have to admit, increasingly more difficult in the past 15 years. As farming is trying to beat nature's cycle and good fortune, unfortunately not always with the best results. The fact that we live in a financial world that considers 1 year long-term and business projections a Bible cannot be useful either. Unfortunately, they are often recipes for mediocrity stuffed with artificial ingredients to make things look better than they really are. Just imagine what a pity if our grandchildren would have to go to a museum to discover taste. But today, there's still no doubt in my mind. You continue to produce the best salmon in the world. A legacy, however, that should not be taken for granted, and a legacy that should be cared for future generations. Balik today is proud, very proud, to be an ambassador of Norway's salmon. Now, I do, however, understand why most rational business people shake their head in disbelief when visiting our place. It was a crazy idea from the start, and somehow it still is. And many people has asked me today, how come nobody in Norway does this? I suppose you guys are just not crazy enough yet. But here's an introduction to become a bit more stupid. So there you are. Thank you very much.